on to eligibility. Every student is eligible for special ed services when they have a qualifying disability that impacts their education. So I've got a few questions that I'm going to ask, but I'm going to string them together for all of you. What do you like seeing in the notes for legal compliance? And is it enough to just write team agreed on eligibility? And what would you document from the conversation? Share a little bit of your rationale.
I think it's important to document which eligibility categories were considered and have that in the notes. I recently had an IEP where the team was reviewing an IEE, and part of the recommendation of that IEE was that we change eligibility categories. This wasn't even the child's triennial review, so we weren't necessarily considering eligibility, but it was helpful to have there in the notes that what the recommendation from the IEE was, what eligibilities he currently had and what we were considering, so that we could document what that conversation was and how that conversation evolved over the meeting.
Another student I think of when I think of really clearly documenting eligibility conversation in the notes of an IEP meeting is for some of our moderate severe students especially, their eligibility may be listed as multiple disability, and really having the conversation about what that meant for that student and the considerations that went into determining multiple disability really was the best summary of what their eligibility is.
I've even had a case where the team discussed, based upon an independent evaluation, we discussed in detail which would be the primary eligibility, which would be the secondary eligibility, because people on the team had different perspectives on that. So that's another time that it would behoove you to say, team agreed that student's primary eligibility will be, and the second eligibility will be.
I guess I could throw two more cents in, John. Another one I think of as I look at your questions on the screen are our students who are not found eligible for special education. They may actually have a disability, but they're not eligible for special education services. So really clearly documenting the team's conversation when determining that they were not eligible will help to explain that decision should it ever be questioned in the future.
So a transition plan is needed for students who are going to be 16 during the effective dates of the IEP. How should we document in the notes that we've addressed the transition page?
You know, Brian, working with some of the high school students, I think it's important to specifically document the student's input, because the transition plan is about the student and how we're going to support him as he leaves school and what skills we're going to help him develop. While the parents' input is important as well, I think this is the one aspect that really needs the students' participation, and that we should document how we gathered the information, whether by interview, informal assessments, things like that. But this is a big one for the high school kids. Right.
Yeah. One way I like to think about it is that the ITP really starts to drive the process in some way once a student's 16 or older, because it's their desires that are driving our decisions for what and how we're going to instruct that student and what skills we're going to work on building. So yeah, I think it's really important as well that we make sure that that participation is documented, and that if the student participated in the meeting and participated in the discussion of the ITP during the meeting, that's well documented as well. What questions did they have? What concerns did they have? What were their ideas that they shared during the meeting? And if they didn't participate during the meeting, then it's very important to note in that ITP section that they did participate in the development of that ITP.
You know what, Brian, one thing you mentioned, it just sparked something that I remembered from a CDE review in a different district. We actually had to go back and review our transition plans with high school students who were not on the invitation as being invited. So CDE wanted to make sure the student had their input. So we had to hold another meeting and review it with the student present.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very important, I think. And I think it's one of those things that sometimes we on IEP teams kind of tend to gloss over the ITPs as, additional or maybe non-essential elements. But that student participation is essential and it's key, and documenting it well is very important.
So when we're looking at the present levels portion of the IEP being documented in the notes template, sometimes the present levels speak for themselves as far as the content provided in the IEP, but it doesn't give you really the insight to the conversation that happened while the present levels were being presented. So which team members might you expect to be documented in the notes as people that were contributing to the conversation while reviewing the present levels of an IEP?
No, Crystal, I think I totally agree with you. The present level page really does speak for itself. But there's specific information that we may not have prior to the IEP, and that is parents' input. So any of their input, any of their concerns, you want to definitely document that. And you want to also tell how you address their concerns if they have any concerns. Also, the general education teacher, a lot of times they attend the meetings and we don't have clear documentation of their participation, but we definitely need to include how the general education teacher participated. And a lot of times it's on the present levels page, especially when we have students that are receiving resource services and they're in the general education environment for the majority of their day, or students that are being mainstreamed as well.
So as we previously discussed, our district does have expectations for how we are responding to parents and how we are documenting that in the notes of the IEP. You can feel free to slide back to slides 13 and 14 if you want more information on the exact procedure we'd like you to follow. But please know that when you are taking notes and parent is expressing a concern or a question, that you should be responding it to directly, and it should be documented in the notes.
Thank you for mentioning that, Crystal. If somebody were to review the IEP that wasn't present and there was a parent concern that was listed, maybe the IEP team did respond, but if they don't document that response, the person reading it would think that that's a concern that was left unanswered, that we haven't addressed the student need in that area. So district response is just as important as the parent concerns. I'm glad you pointed that out.
Crystal, I sometimes use a strategy in the meetings. When a parent has multiple concerns, I kind of bullet them really quick in the notes. And as we continue with the meeting, it does allow me to go back and ask follow-up questions of like general ed teacher or special ed teacher with how a goal might address parents' concerns. And at the same time, at the very end of the meeting, we're able to look at the notes and ask the parent, did we address all of your concerns? We discussed he couldn't add, your student can't read, and we would specifically spell out exactly what we discussed, and parent can agree or disagree that we've addressed all the concerns.
Awesome. And document that as well, that you went back and
Yes.
reviewed all parent concerns.